Okay, welcome everybody. I think we'll get underway. We've got a lot to cover today. I am joined today by my absolutely brilliant assistant, Tricia, and she'll continue letting people in as they request it. You're welcome to have your videos on or off. It's entirely up to you. We have put you all on mute. Now, today's session, we will stop and have a couple of Q&A breaks as we move through. And we'll have an extended Q&A at the end of the presentation. I don't want to keep you too long. It should be about half an hour or so, depending on how many questions come through. Feel free to utilise the chat box initially for your questions, and Tricia will facilitate that at key points throughout the presentation, and we'll have interactive Q&A at the end. So I hope that all suits you guys. I'm hoping you can all see, I'm sharing my screen. I hope it's working, and you should see something that says investor briefing on the New South Wales rental laws. I've got a thumbs up, so thank you very much there. All right, I was saying to other people, I haven't done this for quite some time, so I'm a little rusty, so please forgive my little errors as we go on through. Okay, so who am I? Why should you listen to me? Well, my name is Jo Natoli and I'm your host today. And as I mentioned, I'm joined by my brilliant assistant, Tricia, who will be helping me do little bits and bobs throughout in the background. I'm the principal of the Rentals Specialists. We are a specialist investment property management agency. And I'm an investment manager myself and a property management expert, having been a property manager since 1991. I'm also a property investor and I'm a tenant. And I'm currently also serving as a non-executive director on the board of the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales and on the property management chapter and strata management chapter committees within the REI New South Wales. So as you can tell, I am absolutely neck deep in all things property management. We have a really diverse group of people in the room today, so thank you very much for joining me. I've got clients in here, I've got professionals aligned from other aligned industries, and I've got some reporters and educators as well, so thank you very much. As I said, we'll leave some room for Q&A throughout, so feel free to utilise the chat box and we'll do some face-to-face Q&A at the end. So there are some laws that have already changed and have already been implemented. In October 2024, laws around rent increases were implemented on the 31st of October. Now, it was a common thought that rents could only be increased every 12 months anyway, so this change shouldn't create too much of an impact here. But there was a loophole in the way the old legislation was written, and it allowed for rent increases to occur on a basis that was more frequent than every 12 months if fixed term leases were being entered into. So the change that's been implemented since the 31st of October has simply closed that loophole. Rent increases now can only happen every 12 months. No ifs, buts or maybes on that. And the first one can only be implemented 12 months after the beginning of the tenancy. So, like I said, most people had already assumed that rent increases were only able to occur every 12 months. So that particular change in the legislation will result in very little impact there. Now, the other law that has already been implemented is around starting costs that the tenant needs to pay when a lease starts. Now, in recent times, there have been some organisations who are charging tenants for background checks, the premise being that it would help them bolster their application and put them at the front of the queue, so to speak. and therefore increase their chances of being accepted for a rental property. Now, this has been prohibited. Tenants can't be charged for background checks. Tenants can only be charged for their holding deposit, which then gets applied to their first period of rent, their bond, and if the lease is over 3 years, the registration fee to register the lease with the it used to be called the Land Titles Office. I can't remember what it's called now, but so nothing else can be charged onto the tenant. So what we're going to see now for the property managers in the room is a lot of those companies will stop offering that service to tenants. So what's about to change? And this is where it gets really, really interesting. Now, there are 4 main changes to the legislation, and they surround terminating leases, exclusion periods, the pet laws, which is a real controversial one, and ways to pay rent. There are a few small administrative changes as well, and there is some other change, particularly around the portable bond scheme, which is not going to be applied till much later on in the towards the end of the year. We've heard just this week that these changes are all going to be implemented on the 19th of May. Which is wonderful. As an industry, just so you know, we haven't seen the final regulations yet, but it was announced on social media that these changes are going to apply from the 19th of May. So the first one let's talk about is terminating leases. Now, even though I'm a tenant, this one is a particular bugbear of mine. But anyway, we'll discuss that. So if you need to recover possession of your property, you now need a reason to do so. The reasons are set out in the Residential Tenancies Act, the new Act, and you cannot terminate a tenancy for any other reason other than those prescribed reasons in the Act. The ability for a landlord to request vacant possession without a reason, it's called a no grounds notice or a 90-day notice. That has been completely removed from the Act and we can no longer use it. The other controversial change to the Act is the removal of the end of fixed term. And this is what really gets my goat. But essentially now we have a contract, a lease agreement that can't be terminated on its end date. No other contract that I'm aware of operates this way. So to end a lease contract, you can only do so if one of the prescribed reasons applies. So when we have a look at the current reasons for terminating a tenancy, you will see that you'll still be able to terminate the tenancy on due to a breach. However, the tribunal has been given latitude to consider the nature of the breach, previous breaches, steps taken by a tenant to remedy a breach, steps taken by the landlord about the breach, the previous history of the tenancy, and any other matter that the tribunal considers is relevant. And if the tribunal considers that the tenant has remedied the breach, they may in fact refuse to order the termination. So terminating a tenancy on a breach is going to start becoming very, very difficult. It's going to require a lot of paperwork and a lot of visits to the property over a prolonged period of time. And one of the reasons why the no grounds 90-day notice was helpful was because it was a very polite, non-adversarial, very diplomatic way of recovering possession of your property. And so a lot of work and effort is going to have to go into terminating a tenancy on a breach. Now, The new grounds to terminate a tenancy include a proposed sale. So if you want to spruce your place up or if you want to give it some repairs or maintenance where the property needs to become vacant, but works need to start within 2 months, or if you're going to demolish the property, or if the property is no longer going to be used as a rental property for at least 12 months. For example, if you wish to put the property on the short-term rental market, or if the property, say, has a dual zoning and you want to change it from a residential use to a commercial use, or if the landlord wants to move in, or if they want some of their family to move in for at least 6 months. Now, thankfully, the Act has been written in a way that says if a tenant hasn't vacated the property after being given a termination notice, the tribunal must make the termination order if it's satisfied that the notice was given in accordance with the Act. The notice was used, the ground for the notice, i.e. the reason for the notice, is genuine, and the tenant hasn't vacated. Now, unfortunately, we've seen some real horror stories coming out of Victoria about landlords being unable to move back into their own properties because VCAT down there have determined that the tenant's needs were greater than those of the landlord. But hopefully, the way our Act has been written, and it turns on that word must, hopefully because we have that word in our Act, then we'll be able to eliminate that circus here in New South Wales, but it does remain to be seen. Now, as I was saying earlier, the government has removed the ability to recover possession of your property based on the lease approaching the end of its fixed term, and they have also removed the 90-day ground notice, unfortunately. On a personal note, I don't mind so much the 90-day grounds being removed, but I really do have an objection, a very strong objection to the end of fixed term provision being removed. I mean, having a contract with technically no end date is just ludicrous in my mind, but I'm not a government official. Okay, so the government has now announced, as I said, that changes are going to be implemented on the 19th of May. We're yet to see the final regulations attached to the new legislation. So the evidence that I have listed here is speculative. I need to emphasise that. However, I did see a version of the draft regulations. So this list is based on what I have seen and little snippets that have been written into the Act. So this particular list is subject to change, but it will give you an idea of what they're looking for. So you'll see here that in the sale of a premises, it's listed that copy of part of the contract. It's unclear at this stage what parts of the contract will need to be provided. I'm suggesting that it will be the first page of the contract where it lists clearly the vendor's name, the vendor's agent, the purchaser's name, and the purchaser's solicitor, and it has the signature panel and the dates of the contract. We're unsure at this stage whether we will be able to redact anything or not. Now, it's likely in the instance that a landlord is about to put the property on the market that the landlord will need to provide a copy of the sales agency authority as well, and possibly even a copy of the draft contract, because we can't go to market unless we actually have both of those things. Now, if you need to renovate your property or do major repairs, or if you have family move in, you will most likely need to provide a written statement in the form of a statutory declaration. You may also need to provide quotes from a builder or a contract with a builder for any renovations and repairs that you need to do. And if you're saying that a family member needs to move into the property, it is very, very possible that you're going to need a statement from that family member as well. And so that begs the question, who is considered family? The landlord is family, obviously, and the spouse or de facto partner of the landlord, plus the parent, the grandparent, a child, a grandchild, a sibling, a child of a sibling, the sibling of a parent or a first cousin of either the landlord or the landlord's spouse or de facto. They are the people who, under the Act, will be considered family. Plus, any dependent of the landlord's who ordinarily lives with the landlord. And that's it. No other person, you cannot terminate a tenancy for any other person to move into that property. So your mate down the road isn't counted. Your neighbour who you know has fallen on hard times and you really want to help them out with a rental property, they are not counted. You can't help them. It's only the people here who are considered family and who you can legally terminate a tenancy for. So part of the changes in the Act include extended notice periods. So if you want to terminate a fixed term tenancy on one of the grounds that I have talked about already, the amount of notice you need to give is going to depend entirely on how long the fixed term of the lease is and what the reason for the termination notice is. Except in the case of a breach, no notice can require the tenant to move out prior to the end of the fixed term. So if the lease is what's now called a short fixed term, meaning a term of 6 months or less, then you're going to need to give the tenant 60 days notice of their termination. If the fixed term of the tenancy is anything above 6 months, you're going to need to give 90 days notice. Now, if the lease is a periodic tenancy, so the fixed term is clicked over and no renewal has been entered into, then the notice period on that is going to be 90 days. That remains the same. A breach remains at 14 days notice, and an actual sale where we've had the contracts exchanged already, that remains unchanged at 30 days. Now, if the reason for termination relates to an employee or caretaker agreement ending, then the notice period is going to be 30 days, except if the written contract between the parties specifies a longer date. So it would be the longer of the two dates. Now, it's really, really important that everybody familiarise themselves with these notice and lease periods, because if you make a mistake, your notice to the tenant will become invalid and your termination will be voided. If it ends up in NCAT, the tribunal will absolutely 100% definitely rule against you. After having received a termination notice, the tenant can now leave their fixed term tenancy without penalty. If they are in a short fixed term, they can, in return, give the landlord 14 days notice if they're in the last 60 days of their lease. If they're in another fixed term, i.e. a fixed term beyond or more than 6 months, then they can give the landlord 14 days notice if they're in the last 90 days of their lease. There's been no changes here with respect to periodic leases. So if the tenant can vacate the property at any time after they receive a termination notice, excuse me, and they pay rent up until the day they vacate. Now, one of the biggest changes to the Act is the introduction of exclusion periods after you have given the tenant a notice of termination. Excuse me. Sorry about that. The purpose of exclusions is to act, obviously, as a deterrent to landlords and agents giving false reasons for a notice of termination. If you say you need vacant possession because the property will no longer be used as a rental property, you will be excluded from participating in the rental market for 12 months. Now, if the reason you've given is that the property will be demolished, or that you want to spruce the place up and get it ready for a sale, or if you have family moving in, then your exclusion period is going to be 6 months. If you need to do significant renovations or repairs that absolutely require the property to be vacant, you will be excluded from participating in the rental market for 4 weeks. Now, penalties will apply if you release the property during the exclusion period. Owners also won't be able to hop around to different property managers to try and get around the exclusion periods, because you're going to need to declare that to the new agent that the property is in an exclusion period. Plus, pardon me, you're also going to need to provide data to the rental commissioner about the reasons why you're terminating the tenancy. Plus, let's say you've asked your tenant to move out because you want to Airbnb your property, but then you've realised how difficult it is and how time consuming it is, and then you decide to put it back on the rental market. Well, too bad, your property's been excluded. You actually need to get permission from the rental commissioner to then put your property back on the rental market. And if they say no and you turn around and put your property on the rental market, well, then you're going to be up for significant fines, which I'll discuss a little bit later. Now, as I mentioned, when you issue a notice of termination to your tenant, you're going to need to provide data to the rental commissioner along with the evidence, the same evidence that you have provided to your tenant. They're going to distill this data and publish it on the department's website on an annual basis. This particular requirement won't commence until the 1st of July. Now, I have a few moments to answer some questions before moving on to the next big topic. So let me quickly, feel free to unmute yourself if you like and ask a couple of questions about that particular topic that we've just discussed. And if there's nothing, then I will absolutely move on.
So just a question. So if you've got is it more conducive then to offer somebody a 6-month contract? I mean, is that preferable going forward in the future if you wish to change or anything else along those lines? And then at the end of the 6-month contract, when that ends, can you increase the rental price at the end of the 6-month rental contract?
To answer the second part of your question, no, you can't increase the rent after the 6-month contract. The way the Act has been written now is a rent increase can only be implemented every 12 months. The 12 months starts from the beginning of the tenancy. So the previous Act it didn't say when the first increase could occur. So you could actually, in theory, increase it 3 months after the tenant moved in. But it was a quirk in the legislation, the way it was written, which is why they've now closed it. So it's 12 months, no ifs, buts or maybes. It's 12 months from the day that the lease starts.
So in essence, the best thing for me to do then, if I've got quite a popular property, is basically to enter into a 6-month lease agreement and to provide 90 days termination each 6-month contract. and then that way I can get a new tenant in and I can increase the rent.
The Act will prevent you from doing that because firstly, there are no grounds for end of fixed term. That has been removed. You need to provide, you can only terminate a tenancy based on the grounds that I outlined. And you need to provide supporting evidence of those grounds. And if those grounds are not genuine, and it is discovered, you will be up for hefty fines. So there is a clear deterrence for you to do that. The laws have been written, and I don't necessarily agree with this. Let me be perfectly frank about that. But the laws have been written to deter that very action from people, because a lot of tenants were experiencing landlords doing exactly that, terminating tenancies after 6 months, implementing huge rent increases when they put the property back on the market.
Okay.
So
can I do that for a 3-month contract then, a short-term stay contract?
No, you cannot. You cannot do it for any contract. The termination reasons apply irrespective and regardless of the term of the tenancy that you enter into.
So it'd be best for me then to move straight to Airbnb and not to have this anymore. Because I can get Airbnb in my place just like left, right, and centre. So it'd be best for me to take my property off the rental market and to Airbnb it.
If you do take your property off the Airbnb market, off the rental market and put it into the Airbnb market, then you will be excluded from the normal rental market for a period of 12 months. However, be warned, I'm aware, due to the work that I do on the board, I am aware that they are also looking at tinkering with the short-term rental accommodation frameworks, and you will probably find that currently that 180-day restrictions on STRA will change. So be aware that they are looking at that as well, because they really want to, their concern is that they've sapped the STRA market has sapped all of quality rental properties, and they are looking at ways of taking back those rental properties away from the short-term rental market and putting them back into the long-term rental market. So you can't get away from these grounds, and you will not be able to just move through tenancies the way
Can I turn it into a boarding house?
Only if you have council approval to do that. Unregistered boarding houses, I'm familiar with the Boarding House Act.
So I can't do that. So the next best thing for me then would be to just go via flatmates.com, not enter the residential tenancy market at all, and just simply put flatmates in there, so to speak.
That becomes an unregistered boarding house, which then creates its own set of problems. Let's be clear about that. You will compromise your landlord's insurance policy. You will have the wrath of the council on your back. You will not have any protections. What protections are there under the Residential Tenancies Act? I'm not trying to scare you, so please don't misunderstand.
No.
But I'm just being very matter of fact. These are the situations. I have gone through all of these scenarios myself in my head. I haven't yet found a way around it.
Going forward in the rental contracts, can you automatically put rental increases in there, so there'll be an indexation clause?
You can absolutely still write rent increases into the lease. However, they must be 12 months apart.
Okay. But I could go and put a substantial rent increase into the contract.
No, because you still need to be able to justify that rental increase via comparable market data. And a tenant has always had the ability to challenge a rent increase. Most have not challenged a rent increase because they have been so fearful of a retaliatory eviction. That fear now will be removed from them. So we're going to see a lot more tenants challenging the legitimacy and bona fides of rent increase notices, mark my words. Now, we do have a question from Jack Parker. Thank you. What about existing periodic leases? How will the new legislation apply to these? Exactly the same way. a lease will click over from a fixed term to a periodic term, and they are viewed under the Act pretty much the same. The only difference being the notice periods. All of those grounds, apart from a breach and apart from an actual sale, the notice periods will be 90 days instead of 60 days if it was a short-term fixed term. Richard asks, is there any service levels for the Secretary to respond? We do not. Richard, that's an excellent question. Is there any service levels for the Secretary to respond to notifications, or can they take as long as they like? We have been assured by the Secretary that her approvals will be quick, but we are yet to see that framework. So I can't answer that with any degree of certainty, unfortunately, Richard. Bill asks, increased risk means that the budget to operate the property will increase rents across the board. Yes, I don't disagree with that. However, you still need to justify your rent increases with comparable market data. So I'm going to move on to the next section. That were some excellent questions, guys. Thank you. Pet laws. Another very, very controversial change to the legislation. So you are no longer going to be able to say no to a pet unless in certain circumstances. And I'll cover those circumstances shortly. The big points here are that there will be a prescribed application form. There will be laws around advertising and pets. There are laws around conditions of consent and legislated reasons for refusal. Richard, I'll answer that question after this bit. Now, the Office of Fair Trading is currently working up a prescribed application form for tenants to give landlords and agents when seeking approval for a pet. The application will need to be signed by all tenants jointly. Pardon me. Now, a landlord they absolutely must respond to the application within 21 days. If the landlord does not respond to the application, then it is considered a deemed approval without any conditions whatsoever. Now, I think, but I'm not 100% sure, that the response will also need to be on a prescribed form, but I'm not sure about that. Now, regardless, it will need to be in writing. It will need to include your approval or refusal. Now, if it is an approval, then you can set out the reasonable conditions of approval. And if it's a refusal, you must set out the conditions, or the reasons rather, for the refusal. You're limited in the reasons that you can provide, as I said. Now, a reasonable condition of consent could be that you can't keep the animal inside. But this is only reasonable if the animal is normally an outside type of animal. A great example of this would be a chicken. Yes, you can keep a chicken, but you must keep the chicken outside. That's reasonable because a chicken normally lives outside anyway. If it's a cat, say, and you say, yes, you can keep a cat, but the cat must stay outside, then that condition will be considered unreasonable, and the tenant will be able to fight that, and they will probably win based on how the Act is written at NCAT. Also unreasonable are requests for extra rent, extra bond, or any extra security. But you will be able to ask for carpets to be professionally cleaned if the animal is an inside animal, of course, and you will be able to ask for the property to be professionally fumigated, but only if the property is a mammal. If it's a reptile or some other species, then no, you can't ask for fumigation, only if the animal is a mammal. Now, if you want to refuse a pet application, you can only draw upon these particular reasons. There will be too many pets at the property. Now, I'm eagerly awaiting the specific number here from Fair Trading. However, as I mentioned earlier, I was very fortunate to be able to read the draft regulations, and their idea of what too many pets in a rental property is interesting and a little bit concerning. So I'm waiting with bated breath to be able to see what they consider is a good number of pets in a property and what they consider to be reasonable. Another reason is the property is unsuitable for an animal, and that could be because the fencing isn't good enough, or there isn't sufficient open space for the animal, or it would be harmful to the welfare of the animal. Or keeping an animal would likely cause damage that would cost more than the bond to reasonably repair. Now, I'm not quite sure what reasonably repair means, but how you would anticipate this is anyone's guess. I don't know. I do suspect that a lot of people will potentially use that particular reason for refusal. So it will be very interesting to see how that travels through the NCAT system and how bogged down the NCAT system will become because of this. Now, you can say no if the property being leased is your place of residence, and you're intending to moving back. So if you're living there now, you're chuffing off overseas for 2 years and you intend on coming back, you can use that as a legitimate reason to say no to a pet. You can also say no if an approval would contravene any other law or restrictions, such as a council regulation. As I mentioned earlier, you're no longer allowed to advertise that pets are not allowed at a property. Now, I should point out that these new pet laws will not apply to proper, qualified, registered assistance animals such as seeing eye dogs, but they will apply to companion animals and any other animal. Now, again, I have a few more minutes, so before we get on to the next part, let me have a quick look at the chat room, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in. Okay. Chat's busy. Okay, I understand rent increases can be greater. Okay, Richard asked just about rent increases. I understand rent increases can be greater CPI. What evidence is required? CPI rent increases in the residential space are actually quite rare. You see that more prevalent in the commercial space, where it is pre-written that rents will increase by CPI. Typically here, rent increases are done by market comparable data, but there's nothing to say that you can't increase by CPI, but it still needs to be in line with market conditions, and the Act is clear on that, and that bit hasn't changed. I understand. Are similar laws expected? Okay, somebody has asked, are similar laws expected to be introduced in other states? The simple answer is yes. There is a push from federal government at the moment to harmonise and align all the laws across the country. We are seeing that happen. In fact, I will be sending out after this, probably tomorrow, there is, you can object to these on a federal level. These state laws are done, it's done, but we can object on a federal level and try and gain some momentum and try and get our voices heard. But yes, look, Victoria had a lot of these changes come in, I'd say maybe about 18 months ago now. I could be a little bit wrong on that, but about 18 months ago. Queensland's also had similar changes. So, yeah. The New South Wales Rental Commissioner, Trina Jones, is a recent immigrant, and okay. Yeah, well, yes, that's not lost on me, Bill. What happens if a tenant refuses to accept a suitably justified rent increase? David, that hasn't changed. The tenant will have the ability to apply to NCAT and on the basis that the rent increase is unjustified, and then it will need to be determined by NCAT. So you need to be very, very sure about your data when you're implementing a rent increase. Okay. They still need to get permission through Strata. Actually, Helen, yes, regarding pets, Strata approval will still be required if the Strata plan requires that in their bylaws. However, it's a very separate process. The landlord can approve or not, but Strata law has changed recently as well, and Stratas really are not allowed to say no to a pet. They can impose particular conditions such as size conditions. Yep, we approve a dog, but it can't be more than 25 kilos. Then the tenant has to satisfy that condition as well. But Strata no longer has the ability to actually say no to a pet either. So yes, they still need to get Strata permission. However, it's completely separate and independent to the owner's permission. And as a landlord, you don't need to navigate that process for them on their behalf. It's entirely on their shoulders to seek that permission. But you as a landlord, you need to provide that approval or refusal separately to Strata.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Moving on. We're almost through, guys. So there's been some changes around ways to pay rent. There are now 2 prescribed methods, and they for a tenant to pay rent, and they must be fee-free to the tenant. A landlord or an agent now must offer Centrepay. So you will need to register with Centrepay as a supplier. Now, I went to do this in November, and I went to try and do it again this week, and registrations are closed. So hopefully it will be up and running again by May the 19th. I'm not sure what's involved in that whole process and how long it takes, but currently we actually can't register to accept Centrepay payments. Now, the important thing on Centrepay is that Centrepay costs 99 cents. So if your rent is $400 a week and your tenant pays via Centrepay, you will get oh my God, my maths. You'll get 99 cents short every week. Sorry, I can't figure that out at the top of my head. You will get 99 cents a week less. So just be mindful of that. And you cannot recover that 99 cents from the tenant. Now, we must also offer bank transfers from the tenant's bank account to the owner's or agent's bank account, and this must be fee-free, except for ordinary transaction costs that the tenant's bank imposes on the tenant's bank account. Now, the tenant is going to have the right to choose whichever method they want to use, and it can't be changed unless both parties agree. But the landlord cannot withhold unreasonably their agreement to change the payment method. So if the tenant turns around and says, okay, I've lost my job, I'm on benefits now, I insist that the rent be paid using Centrepay, you have no choice, you must agree. Now, it would be absolutely remiss of me if I did not mention what the penalties involved are going to be for non-compliance, because I have mentioned the penalties previously. Now, one penalty unit is the equivalent of $110. As a corporation, you're going to be fined $71,500. That's a huge amount of money, $71,500 if you give a false or misleading supporting document when issuing a notice of termination to a tenant. So for the property managers in the room, and I know there are some of you here, and welcome, don't give false or misleading evidence. You will be slogged $71,500. And for those people who are landlords, but your property is owned by a corporation, you might have a trust with a corporate trustee, you will come under that. You won't be seen as an individual, you'll be seen as a corporation, $71,500. So you will cop that if you give misleading or false supporting evidence. If you give notice for a reason that is completely untrue and not genuine. If you enter into a lease during the exclusion period without first obtaining the rental commissioner's permission to do so, or if you're a landlord and you go from one property manager to another hoping to get around the exclusion period, if you don't declare that exclusion period to your new agent, you will also be subject to that fine. As an individual, the fine is $11,000. So it's simply not worth it. Now, if you do not offer the tenant a prescribed way to pay their rent, if you don't enable rent to be paid in a prescribed way, or if you try to charge the tenant a fee or pass on a fee for the payment of rent in a prescribed way, you will be fined $5,500. You're going to be fined $2,200 if you advertise a property saying that pets are not permitted. And you're going to be fined $1,100 if you require the tenant to pay using a post-dated negotiable instrument, a check that's forward dated. So there's a penalty. That penalty's been around for a long time, so that hasn't changed actually. So how is everything that I have outlined to you today going to impact you? Well, firstly, I would suggest that you need to be ultra diligent in upholding your lease conditions. So if you're doing an inspection of your property and you observe a breach, you need to act on it. Acting on it will mean things like providing some sort of documentation to the tenant and keeping a record of this yourself. You will need to be much more thorough and paperwork driven when managing your tenancy. And you're really going to need to dot your I's and cross your T's. Now, none of this, I'll deal with it at the end of the tenancy. That's just not going to fly anymore. You need to deal with things because you now need to have a CYA mentality. If you don't know what that means, I can explain that when we're not recording, but you really need to have that mentality where you're preparing for a potential future case. So you need to be highly aware of that. And again, I don't mean to frighten you, but I need to be completely realistic so that everybody understands what the potential ramifications are. Now, you're also going to need to be extra careful with your tenant selection process. Make sure you thoroughly check references and confirm the bona fides of each applicant before offering them your property to rent, because if they turn out to be problematic, you will find it very difficult to recover possession of your property. As I said earlier, terminating on a breach is going to become more and more difficult. So the quality of your landlord's insurance policy is going to be critical now more than ever before. Now, I'm not an insurance broker and I can't give you any advice about policies, but I can say, please, make sure that your landlord's insurance policy is with one of the specialist landlord insurance policy providers, not a general insurer. There are a number of them in the market. Now, your entry and exit reports will need to be stepped up. The days of nondescript entry reports are gone. Everything is going to be need to be detailed very, very thoroughly and photographed in detail. The landlords in the room, ask your current property manager for a copy of the entry condition report they've done on your property. Review it and make sure you're happy with the level of detail provided in it. Now, if you want a sample condition report to compare, by all means, reach out to me and let me know, and I would be happy to provide you with one. Now, for those property managers in the room, please don't skimp on the time involved in creating your entry reports, whether anybody realises it or not. The entry report is the most critical and important document in the whole leasing process. Spend the time to get it done properly from the outset, and it will save you a bunch of headaches at the end of the tenancy. This, of course, flows onto your exit report. Be equally as thorough and document everything. Now, of course, it goes without saying that a whole lot of extra work is going to be required to manage properties and manage them properly, particularly at the beginning and end of a tenancy. So landlords, please do expect fees to rise. It's going to be unsustainable, and they will realise it sooner rather than later. It's unsustainable for property managers to take on the extra responsibilities without analysing the costs involved in providing that extra work. They just won't be able to do it for nothing. So I'm going to be pretty bold here, and I'm going to say that property managers will also most likely start thinking about the numbers of properties under their management, and they will probably start reducing that number so extra care and extra service can be provided to their clients. I see that in itself as a great side effect if that happens. And to be honest, I think landlords should start demanding that property managers manage less properties so better outcomes flow for their clients. But that's a personal opinion. Okay, during the registration process, I did receive a number of questions. I'll quickly answer some of those, and then we'll jump into some interactive. I'm conscious of the time. We'll answer some questions and then jump into some interactive Q&A. So can you terminate a tenant's lease at any time to sell the property? Absolutely you can, but the landlords and property managers will need to follow the prescribed notice periods and provide the evidence that the regulations stipulate, which we're not 100% sure is going to be yet. What do you think the impact to landlords and the property market will be? This legislation change was marketed as a win for the tenants. However, I don't think it's going to benefit the tenants in the manner that the government thinks. And in fact, I think it will make things worse for tenants once those landlords start selling up. What it will do maybe is open the sales market, whereby if there is a mass exodus, then first home buyers might get an opportunity to buy a property, but only if we see a mass exodus, which would potentially put downward pressure on purchase prices. We did see that happen in Victoria. So what do you think the impact on fixed or periodic leases and the abilities of landlords to end or alter leases? This is an amazing question. I really don't think that there is going to be any point in offering tenants a renewal once the initial fixed term has expired. The Act requires that a landlord cause a lease to be prepared and signed initially, but there simply is no more benefit that I can see to either party to follow that initial fixed term with renewals or with additional fixed terms. I just don't see the point in it now. Now, this is also going to be problematic for agencies and property managers, as they're about to lose, a revenue centre in their business. Now, you'll still be able to end a tenancy, but only due to one of the prescribed reasons or if the tenant breaches the agreement. Now, there are some landlords' insurance policies that don't cover periodic tenancies. If you're a landlord with one of those, I urge you to have a look at another policy. Will these new laws impact all leases? Yes. Starting on the 19th of May, these laws are going to apply to all leases. There is a little bit of a transition period where a lease signed before the 13th of December that has rent increases written into it. Those increases will remain in force, but otherwise the new legislation applies across the board. How will the new legislation on pets be impacted by strata legislation? I already covered this. Landlords and agents are not going to need to get strata approval. That's on the tenants. How does long-term tenancies be affected? Sorry, mental blank. How does the new legislation affect long-term tenancies of 20 years or more? Terminating a tenancy of 20 years or longer will absolutely not change. You still apply directly to NCAT to terminate that type of tenancy, but otherwise all the other laws apply to a long-term tenancy equally. Okay, so that brings me to the end of my prepared presentation. I really do hope that you feel you've received some really good quality information about what's going on. And to that end, I would really love your feedback if you can spare a few minutes to scan this code and complete the feedback form. In the meantime, I'm going to open up the floor for some interactive Q&A. Please don't be shy, put up your hand so I can see it, or just unmute yourself and jump right in. If Trisha, who's hanging around in there somewhere, if she sees that you've been waiting a while, she'll unmute you and call on you. I'm just going to quickly check the chat. Linda asks, how will this affect termination notices that have already been served past this date? I'm actually waiting on clarification for that, Linda. I am advised, but I am not 100% certain that any termination notice that has already been served will be valid. That is good. Okay, Eva asks, what protection is there for landlords and tenants who default and damage our properties? Eva, you need to rely on your landlord's insurance. You will need to rely on your property manager being incredibly thorough with their entries and exits, but also pointing out the breaches and damage during their regular routine inspections. And as I said earlier, don't leave things till the last minute. Don't worry about it. We'll deal with it at the end of the tenancy. No, that no longer flies. It needs to be dealt with. The tenants need to be notified in writing that they've damaged the property in XYZ manner and that it needs to be rectified. And you will need to, or the property manager will need to actively follow that up and make sure that gets done. I will, can I get access to the slides instead of the recording? I don't know. I was planning on sending out the recording. Okay, Linda asks, how do you receipt a tenant's rent if they are using Centrepay? They are going to be 99 cents short each week. That's exactly right. They will be 99 cents short each week, and the expense, you will need to create an expense to the landlord of 99 cents each week, which in the mind of the rental commissioner is no big deal because it's tax deductible. Anyway, if your demographic is predominantly tenants who use Centrepay, well then maybe perhaps advertise the property 99 cents more expensive. I know it sounds a little bit ridiculous, but that's the only other way around it. So okay, so that's the chat box dealt with. Let me jump into I'm going to just stop sharing now. All right, do we have any questions from anybody in the room?
I have a question, Jo.
Yes,
now, as
Helen.
you know the tenants that we've got in there now, with this mold that's going to keep happening, if we decide to break the lease with them, because our fear is that even though we've done the unit up, there hasn't been mold in the unit for over 60 years in that place. All of a sudden there is. Even though we've got photos and proof of us doing the unit up and the unit that looked like before we done it up.
Yep.
And if they want to fight it, because of what they've said last time we were there. Mum and dad are more worried about what's going to happen in the long run because we know the mold's going to keep coming back.
Yeah.
They're worried that that they're going to end up trying to either take mum to the tenancy board or whatever to say it's our fault. When
I think that given the length of ownership and how long that property has been in your family and the absolute lack of history of any sort of mold problems before, I think it's going to be a relatively easy argument to say that they've been responsible. And this is where a quality property manager comes in, and their record keeping needs to be absolutely spot on. So the property manager, and I have done this in your case, the property manager, when they walk in, they need to note, what's the weather like? Has it been hot? Has it been cold? When I walked into that property, it's like a greenhouse. Like there's windows everywhere, but there's nothing open. There's absolutely no ventilation. And I have been good enough to make notes of that. So
you've done a wonderful job, and I
Yes.
appreciate it. I really do.
Thank you. So we have kept those notes that we will be able to rely upon if they should fight that. So whilst it's a concern, it's not a huge concern. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not bothering me in any way.
It's not bothering me. Sorry. It's not bothering me. It's more mum and dad that are stressing. And
Yeah.
I've said, just let it be.
And do you know what? You have an amazing insurance policy as well. So
yeah, well, that's another thing. Are we?
You're covered.
Sorry, he's just gone a bit nuts. Are we? I've got to go have a look at the insurance documents, like for the kitchen unstuck and a couple of other bits that have popped up since we had a look. I'm going to see if our insurance can cover that instead of getting someone in to fix them little bits and pieces.
Your landlord's insurance will cover any deficiencies so if the mold has been caused by them failing to ventilate the property, for example, that could be classified as tenant negligence, and that would we would be able to cover that on your insurance. I have certainly had that claim successfully before.
Okay.
You're very, very welcome, Linda. Thank you.
Thank
Do
you
we have
very
any
much.
other? You're very welcome. Are there any other questions from the floor? I'm here and I've got as much time as you need. I'm concerned about your time, but I have as much time as everybody needs. So if there are any questions, please don't be shy, open your mic and go for it.
Oh, just one question. Like lots of times so for pets, I've had basically people who want to have pet rats or pet rabbits, and I've always said no to pet mice or pet rats and rabbits because I always want to, or guinea pigs because I want to keep them in their room and they just stink.
Yep.
Will I be able to do that in the future, to say no to those things? That I would say they're predominantly outdoor animals, or
you can try that argument. I don't know whether it would work or not though. And I think that that is going to be one of the little loopholes that we might be able to try and argue pets for some pets. I don't know if guinea pigs are outside animals. I know that I would consider rabbits to be outside animals. So yeah, I would certainly agree with that. But
I've had pets, rabbits, and mice, pet rats. It's just like no, not having it. The other thing is the other one is basically in my strata. It basically says you are allowed to have pets. However, they are not allowed to be fed outside, and they are not allowed to be on the common property.
Right. So you will be able to pass those conditions on as part of your approval or your conditions. Assuming that you approve a pet, you will be able to pass those conditions on. But strata will also pass those conditions on as well.
Yeah. And it sounds like ridiculously enough, every time the pet's not there, I've got to take a photograph of them with their pet outside on common property to build a case. Because what they also do is they actually like to feed their pets outside. So they don't like to feed the dog the food inside the house in the kitchen. They will always take it outside and put it on the outside steps and feed the animals outside, which is obviously not flash either.
Well, if it's against the strata bylaws, well then, I mean, look, it would be unreasonable to expect that you're there photographing them, of course, unless you live in the same strata complex. But
Which I
that would
don't.
be on that would be on strata to prove, actually, not you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're very welcome to those who have thanked me in the chat box. It's been my absolute pleasure to get this out. I've been hoping to get it out for quite some time. Any other questions? Again, I say that I have all the time in the world. You guys have the time restrictions, so.
So once again, I have a property in Queensland, I have a property in Sydney, and generally what I do is I spend 6 months here and 6 months there and rent it out alternately. I guess under this arrangement, I will no longer be able to do that. So I lived in Queensland for 6 months, I live in New South Wales for 6 months. The 6 months that I'm not in either place, I rent it out. And I just bounce backwards and forwards between living in Queensland and living in Sydney.
I can't speak to the laws in Queensland, but here in New South Wales, then you would need to, you would still be able to do that, but I can't see a tenant agreeing to sign a lease for 6 months. Firstly, they have, there's been a shift away from 6-month leases for a number of years now. A lot of tenants, and I've seen that in a number of agencies that I consult to, as well as in my own agency. There's been a real shift to 12-month leases to provide that security of tenure for the tenants, but also to provide that security of income for the owners. So I can't tell you the last time I saw a 6-month lease. In reality, though, it's possible to do what you suggest. However, you will need to provide the tenant with the required notice that's been stipulated in the Act. And again, if you are providing that notice under false pretenses, then you will be excluded from the rental market when you move in. And there's 6 months for that particular reason. You'd be excluded from the rental market for 6 months. So you'd need to be very sure of your dates, and you will also need to be prepared for your tenant to challenge the legitimacy of the notice that they've received from you. What we will see as a result of this is we're going to see tenants really starting to challenge a lot more what they're being told by their owners and by their agents. So, and that will result in our NCAT system being completely clogged up. And we've seen that in Victoria. There are some cases in Victoria that are not being heard for 2 years. And it's because of the ridiculous laws that they had implemented down there. So I expect very much the same here in New South Wales. Is there anything else I can help with?
Yes, Jo, this is
Yes.
Daisy. That was an excellent presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Daisy. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just wondering as well, this is really pulling the rug under us, isn't it?
Yes,
Like landlords.
yes.
And my question is, so you're saying that there is really no difference whether you do a 6 month or a year in the sense that within 90 days, they just give 14 days notice and they're out of it. What if they broke the lease, if they wanted to break if you sign a 12-month lease and they break the lease within 4 months?
Yes.
Are they up for penalty? Thank you.
Yes. So, Daisy, if you have not given the tenant a notice first in the fixed term, if the
Yes.
tenants want to move out of their own accord, then the normal break lease fees that are currently legislated, they will still apply.
Okay. So
Yeah.
there are benefits then for having a longer term thing, in a sense that if you sort of happen to choose very, very good tenants, and the only reason why they would leave is maybe they're relocating somewhere or whatever, then it is worthwhile to actually have a longer term fixed term lease because if they break the lease, they would have penalties for it. Am I thinking correctly, or?
I can understand how some people would think that, but the most you're going to be able to claim from them is 4 weeks rent. Now, in a periodic tenancy, they have to give 3 weeks rent notice. So what's the benefit? It's 1 week.
Oh, right. I didn't know that they
Yeah,
only need
yeah.
to give. So I thought in periodic tenancy, they need to give, did you say they need to give 3 weeks notice?
21 days. Yeah.
Oh, right. I thought it was like 14 days and they're out of it.
No, 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 no.
So it's always 21 days, even for
Yeah,
periodic. So it's
yeah.
just another week.
Mm.
Wow, amazing. And so I'm just thinking, this significant renovation, I'm thinking about an out if you happen to have very, very bad tenants.
Mm.
So if you do significant renovation, you get quotes to get that renovation done.
Mm.
And then during that intervening period, I know you said the exclusion period is 4 weeks. Are you able still to advertise then? Because by the time new tenants come in, it will be 4 weeks anyway.
That's an
So
excellent question, Daisy. So what you're asking is, can you advertise but not make the property available until a certain date?
yes.
I would be speculating here, and it really depends on how the regulations have been written, and we haven't seen that yet. I would suggest that if you start advertising, but it's very clear in the advertising that the property would be available on XYZ date, that is 4 weeks after the termination,
Absolutely.
do not hold me to this, I don't see how that would be a contravention of the Act, but it will depend entirely on how the regulations have been written. And like I said, I mean, Chris Minns, the Premier, has splashed it across social media yesterday that 19th of May is the implementation date, but we have not seen the final regulations, so we don't know.
Yeah, I would have thought that that would be plausible because I'm thinking about an out. If you were to have like really, really bad tenants, and then the way to do it is I'm gonna do a huge renovation, get the quotes and everything. And
But
then
be careful, Daisy, because if the former tenants have a bone to pick with you and they are monitoring your renovations,
yes.
they see that those renovations are not taking place, they are absolutely within their rights to take you to the tribunal, and you will be up for 11,000. What did I say it was? 11,000
Yeah,
something.
around 11,000. It was a really hefty amount.
Yeah, and if it's a trust owner with a corporate trustee, it's 71,500. So be
Right, I
really
see.
careful.
I know. I think it's very rare that tenants would just take you to the tribunal for after that.
Sorry,
You
they
reckon
have been absolutely empowered here.
Oh, all right.
I'm
Okay.
not saying that in a derogatory way. I am a tenant myself,
Yes.
but tenants have been absolutely empowered, and if they have an absolute gripe with being evicted, and the reason for that eviction is that you want to do substantial renovations that will require the property to be vacant, if they want to be nasty about it, they are within their rights. Now, it's important to say, and I didn't say this in the main presentation, but let's just say you do lease that property inside the exclusion period illegally, but you've done it anyway, you found a tenant, and let's just say they move in 2 weeks instead of waiting the 4 weeks. Even if the former tenant, takes you to NCAT because you have breached the legislation, it does not invalidate your new lease. So even though you have leased the property and signed a lease with a new tenant when you weren't supposed to, that lease does not become invalid. So really important to note that, which I didn't mention in the actual presentation.
Right. No, thank you. Yeah, gee, I tell you, our hands are so tied.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so if they breach the agreement, it makes a mockery of a lot of things. Like you enter a contract which is in effect not a contract.
Correct.
Because and then you so they can do whatever they want. And the thing is that then our best bet is bond money, which will be whittled away very, very quickly because it's within a month and it's all gone. And then you rely heavily on landlord's insurance, which means that the cost is going to go right up. And there is not much we can really do. It's terrible. I don't know whether it's going to be a lot of backlash. I cannot see it alleged. How can they do this? This is just amazing. So
Daisy, in Victoria, what we saw was an exodus of around about 7,000 landlords from the rental market. So we are, if Victoria is anything to go by, we will probably see the same thing here in New South Wales,
that's right.
which, as I was saying earlier in the presentation, is not beneficial to tenants at all. However, the government needs to realise that for themselves. Now, if you still want to invest in property, you need to absolutely, and I don't discourage it, you just need to be really, really careful in your property management selection. You need to have someone who's really switched on, who really understands the legislation very well, and who is a fierce advocate for you and your rights. Property managers can only work within the auspices of the legislation. However, they should know what the legislation is and know how to prosecute your rights. So property management selection here is now going to be crucial, just as your insurance policy is going to be crucial, and just as your paperwork and dotting your I's and crossing your T's is going to be. So failing that, there's still commercial property. Your rights have not been taken away in the commercial realm. And personally, I invest in commercial property, and I have been doing so for a number of years. But so there is also that avenue as well.
Thank you so much, Jo. That was very, very helpful. Thank you.
It's absolutely my pleasure, Daisy. Is there anybody else that I can help? Okay, well, if that's it then, thank you everybody for joining me today. Again, I really hope that it has been informative for you and beneficial for you. Please, I hope you have scanned the feedback QR code and given me some feedback, and let me know whether you would like to attend more of these workshops, and I will be sending out a recording in the next day or so. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you very much. Have
My
a good
pleasure.
day.
Take care, Helen. I'll talk to you very soon.
Sounds good. Bye, darling.
Bye. Oh, Bill, I will pop that back up. I'll quickly start sharing my screen again so you can, there you go. Share. There's the code, Bill. You got that? Let me see. Hang on a minute.
Hi, Joe. I think Irina raised her hand.
Sorry?
Irina. I think Irina had a question right now.
Oh, Irina, sorry, I'm here. I just can't see you. Hang on a second. I'm trying to, what am I doing? Oh my God. Hang on, let me just stop my presentation. Oh no, I can't do that because then I'll lose that. Sorry, Irina, I've lost my meeting. Oh, show meeting, there you go. Oh, okay, sorry, Irina, how you going? Oh, she might not be there. No. Okay. Hey, just popped a fee question above. Okay, hang on, let me look, Irina. Irina, with fees for rental payments, if we offer one free option and tenants decide to use another payment method, a fee can be charged? No. We can offer other methods, but it all has to be free. We have to offer Centrepay, and we have to offer bank transfers, and they have to be free. If you offer another payment method, what other payment method can there be? I can't think of one. We don't accept cash anymore. A lot of banks don't even deal in checks anymore. But we have to, at a minimum, offer those two payment methods, and they must be free. As for other methods, look, I can't tell you actually. Oh, what about credit card payment? That's an excellent question. I actually don't know the answer to that. I would suggest that you could charge a fee for that, because there are merchant fees involved in that, isn't there? I personally would never offer a tenant credit card payments simply because you're encouraging them to get into debt to pay their rent, but that's a personal view that I hold. So I would never offer it, but I think, yeah, you know what? That's a really good question. I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that. Perhaps you could charge for that, but I don't know. Sorry. Bill, I just saw your hand up. Was there something I could help you with? No? Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much again for attending, and you will hear from me in a day or so with a copy of the recording. Take care, everybody. Thank you, and I will host another one of these very, very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.